various people. And also, what does a small group do and what are some events? And so we asked for a little bit of video of just you doing what you're normally going to do here for 40 seconds, 30 seconds. So as you get going, I'll
just act like we like each other.
Like,
and then actively pray. I mean, really heavy.
yeah.
Try not to show the empty seats. Get close-ups of the four together.
Yeah.
Just do those four.
To me, that's complex.
It does have a complex. I still wanted in 3 states.
Father, we'll do towards the beginning, we'll do your favorite breakout rooms. But last time we did tell people to accept the invitation and it seemed to work. So I'll just say that again. Whoever was there seemed to.
Oh, yeah. We did the
We did it.
Yeah, it's like that.
Do we have a number?
Just as a precaution, then I will be interpreter.
I think it's about the same. It was like that. Yeah, it was like the first week of 10 and 9. I think so.
It
Okay,
did
good.
me, but not as much as the second.
Ah, yes.
My arm more sore than the. Did
Oh, somebody else?
I get terrified making this.
You know, feel you.
You feel.
Oh, hello, Michael.
Like I.
Oh, Susan dropped off. She'll be back. We have a minute.
Okay. Right?
Yeah. So we'll wait just a couple minutes. People are a couple minutes late, so we'll get going.
Don't get the bald spot.
Already did. Now I'm gonna get this to Hal.
I'm glad you're having fun.
Oh, that's at your expense.
That's what we want. We want other
You
people.
bet I'm having fun. Just for Hal.
2 minutes and we start. It's the terrible weather that's keeping people from rain and sleet.
It's
Yeah.
raining.
Somewhere.
We had that in Baltimore.
Did you just come back from Baltimore? Wow.
Flew in on Friday evening and roads were flooded.
Oh, right. Hi.
You went there. So you went there. Came home yesterday. Today.
You know, just now, I'm exhausted. I got home like
3 hours
All right,
later.
I will wave people as they arrive. Here we go.
Okay, so we're going to start.
Hi.
Thank you for coming back to this is our 3rd class now, right? On Center and Prayer. And so let's begin with a prayer. So just finding a comfortable body posture, open and relaxed, and allowing your eyes to close. And as you closing your eyes, just letting that be a symbol of turning within, of letting go of the doing, everything that brought us here today, all the doing, all the to-do lists, all the scheduling, all the rushing that we might have had to do to get here. And now, as we're sitting here closing our eyes, it's being time. It's time just to let that go and just open to God's presence within us. Just allowing ourselves to be found. And if there's worry in the mind or judgments or plans, they can go on, but we're just going to drop a little deeper away from that franticness of our thoughts, just into our being. And what sometimes really helps with us just to allow the breath to deepen a little bit. This beautiful gift that God gave us of breath. Just to allow the breath to slow down a bit, to deepen a bit. A few moments just to stay with the sensation of breathing. Just noticing how that happens all by itself. It's a pure gift, providing us with life. Something that's particularly helpful for calming down our nervous system is to pay attention to the breath in the lower belly. Just noticing how the rising and falling of our lower belly with the rhythm of the breath. Just allowing ourselves to open to God's grace right here, right now. We don't have to do anything. We can just be here and be still for a few moments. Since yesterday was All Saints' Day, are you just remembering your patron saint? Just asking for his or her intercession to help you right now to open more to God's grace right now as you are. And then, of course, I have the great contemplatives like Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, just asking them to help us to open to contemplation. We may not be very good at it, but we sure want to become more still. Just a few more moments just to be here. And to allow all the struggle and striving of our thoughts to just kind of melt or relax, knowing that we're always welcome to come to God just the way we are. And just rest in His presence. And when you're ready, you can then make eyes to open.
Okay. So tonight we will dip a little further into, this is number 3 out of 4. So we'll dip a little further into our centering prayer and talk a little bit about what Father Keating calls the human condition, which is why this is such a courageous thing to do and why it's sometimes so challenging. But I just want to appreciate you all for being here. This is, if you've made it this far, you have a contemplative streak. You have a contemplative heart if you've made it this far. It's not easy, is it? It's not easy to set aside time and dedicate it to receiving God with all the busyness. So I just really appreciate you all, joining the saints, these great contemplatives and us in this journey here as we seek to open to God's grace. So tonight we'll talk a little bit about the human condition, and then we'll expand our centering prayer a little further. And but before we do that, just want to take a moment, as we've done in the past week, to kind of reflect a little bit on how was your week so far? How was your week from last time to this time with your practice? Remember, and this is really important, and we're cultivating here is a practice. It's not the thought of centering prayer or on Saturdays will be my contemplative day. It's something we want to learn to drop into our schedule daily. If we're following the great traditions of the church, to drop it in daily, at least once a day, even if it's 5 minutes. And so just invite you to reflect on, how's it been going? Have you found time? Are you making time? Are you finding yourself resistant? Every day have you made time? Or is it, what makes it workable for you? Or what are the challenges? And so we want to ask this question the way we say God might ask it, with compassionate curiosity. How's it going? We can ask it with compassionate curiosity. So I'm going to invite you for a brief moment to share this with someone. So I'm going to ask you just to partner up with someone, and we'll just have one of you share and the other person's listening. And just share how's it going? How are you growing in your centering prayer practice, or what challenges are you facing? So, and those of you at home, we'll put you in a breakout room. Father's going to put you in a breakout room, and you just have to accept the invitation. Once you get into the breakout room, you just have to accept the invitation and be partnered up with someone there. So, how about if we just kind of turn and face each other with you two ladies here, and then Thomas, right, and then there, and just keep kind of right. Oh, and Helen, maybe could you come over here? How's that? And Father, with your buddy Jim. Okay. Yes.
Helen, do you want to partner with me? Because they were gonna.
That's okay.
Oh.
Either way, that's fine.
It doesn't matter.
However you want to do it.
I like you both about the same.
Jim loves everybody. So Father's going to send you to a break. So you'll have, it's just let's say about 2 minutes, 2.5. You'll have 2.5 minutes each way. We'll let you know when to switch. So at home, we'll send you a little note saying it's time to switch directions. But I want to give you one other quick invitation around this. This is challenging. When the person in front of you is sharing, just listen. Just listen the way God would listen. Just beam them with love. Just listen. You don't have to give them advice. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to, just, how would God listen? Just like, oh, my favorite daughter, my favorite son. I'm just right here with you. However your week has been, I love you, love you, love you. Just God's silent presence, right? So let's practice that as you're listening, okay? So decide between the two of you who's going to share first and who's going to hold the God space first. Okay?
How many minutes?
And 2.5 minutes each, and we'll go ahead and go, and we'll let you know when to switch. So you can start now. Father's going to set up the breakout rooms for you all right now.
Right.
I might be able to jump in with that for you, Father.
No, I got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay. He's opening your rooms right now. Here you go.
I've only got one dog, and that's Jim. He's a jealous. Well, actually, that's not true. So Monday, what did I go to? When I was at Monday morning, so and then when I went
So take about another 30 seconds and then we'll let you know to switch. Okay, we'll go ahead and just switch it the other way around. So now your other partner's sharing and you're just silently loving them and listening. Okay, go ahead. We got about another minute. Anything else you want to share? About another minute. Okay, you can start to wrap that up. Great. Just conclude that and thank your partner for listening, providing some love and attention. All right, so welcome back. So we just wanted to open it for a few minutes for anything from that sharing, anything from the week that you learned, discovered, challenges that you may have just been on your heart or your mind that you've shared. Anything you just want to let us all in on? How's it been going? Challenges, successes? Yes, ma'am.
Well,
I'm just going to give you the mic so they can hear you at home.
it's not hard for me to find the time because I do it very first thing. Otherwise, it probably would be hard for me to, do it. But what I found is that for the last few days, I haven't seemed to have come to that quiet place. It seems like I'm more distracted, or I don't know what's going on, but I'm hoping that sometimes that just happens and it goes back.
Boy, that's a really wonderful thing you just hit on. So let me just share one perspective on that. Is that I'm following the footsteps of here of the great contemplatives and Thomas Keating, Father Keating, who kind of brought centering prayer into the contemporary world. The success of centering prayer is doing it. It's not having a quiet mind. So let's notice that it's not achieving a quiet mind is not the success of centering prayer. Sitting regardless. So some days your mind may just move into emptiness, or as St. Anthony said, perfect prayer, or sometimes it's called in the mystical tradition infused contemplation. We may just lose ourselves in God's presence, but actually what Father Thomas says is that's not what's going to happen most of the time. He says what's going to happen most of the time is divine therapy. He calls it the divine therapy. The more still we are, sometimes our mind starts to purge all the thoughts, all the, oh my goodness, all the things start to surface. And that's not a mark of anything bad happening. He actually says as we go through the period of centering prayer, we'll go through periods of maybe that more quiet mind, and then a whole other cycle of, oh my goodness, what's going on? And then it becomes the mark of our success is simply sitting and saying that word to let it go. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everyone? Because I want to make sure we're not thinking that once I've achieved stillness of mind, I've suddenly, it's success.
So if the contemplative space happens, that's wonderful, and you definitely want to enjoy that, right? If it doesn't, and it's a busy mind, then that's your opportunity to let go into God's presence in the middle of all that, right? And a lot of the time in our modern world, that is what's going to happen. So how Father Keating says that is that like every time the thought comes, it's another invitation to let go, right? It's just, and you just gently say a word and let go again. And if it's 1,000 times in 20 minutes, then it's 1,000 opportunities to let go, right? So you cannot go wrong in this practice. How we go wrong is when we get up or just don't even sit down because we think we need to be saintly and quiet. There's even something really beautiful about learning how to let go in the middle of all that, right? Learning how to surrender in the middle of that. No matter what I'm thinking, God, I want to be with you, right? So there's all sorts of things we go through. That's why it's called divine therapy. Sometimes there's memories, unpleasant memories from a long time ago, or we replay a conversation with someone, or so what he calls is like the unconscious unloads, right? And we just sit with it. We just let God do that. And so there's really, that's why so many people don't do this, because it can be so uncomfortable. It can be really uncomfortable sitting there. So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask a highly non-spiritual question. That is, how is it different from meditation? If you say, hey, I don't want you to think of anything. To me, that's not any different from meditation, because the effort of trying to empty your mind, keep it pure, and not have anything into the view your mind at all. I don't see any difference there, but what you just mentioned probably offers some answer. That is the effort of centering prayer is to feel the presence or feel the company of God. And if that's the purpose, but then I have to say a sacred word to push that off. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
Well, it's a little different because it's not, this is not meditation in the Eastern sense of meditation, because our goal is not to quiet the mind. Just want you all to hear that. Our goal is not to quiet our mind. It is not Eastern meditation.
So what's the end point?
The end point is to give ourselves totally to God. And what the word symbolizes is a letting go. Remember last week? You remember the story from last week, the Greek man? We'll talk about this in a second. What our human nature does is I grasp onto, because I think God's not here. I think God's not present. I've got a hold. And what we're doing is when the thought comes, when the gripping comes, when the worry comes, don't we instinctively know that when we sit and worry for 20 minutes, we have not put ourselves in God's presence? Don't we instinctively know if I've just wasted 20 minutes worrying, we instinctively know something about this is not surrendered to God, right? So what we're practicing is the thought comes, I surrender. So if God chooses to give us infused contemplation, if God chooses to give us that St. Anthony's perfect prayer, which is simple union with God, which John Paul II says we're all called to. This is not just the great mystics. It's not just the Teresa of Avila's. It's what our destiny is for all of us. This is a practice. And just one other thing I just wanted to clarify is that, just to get clear on our terminology, in the Christian tradition, specifically actually the Catholic tradition, what we mean by meditation is, and there's a great Benedictine tradition of meditation, what we mean by meditation is that reflective part of my mind where my mind can be used to reflect on something. So we reflect, the classic example is we reflect on the Word of God. We read the gospel and we reflect on it and we let it touch our heart. So that's what meditation is. In this sense, we're using the reflective part of our mind, we're using some part of our mind to simply say the word. And that's what makes it meditation. But it's not the Eastern clearing of the mind. And in the Catholic tradition, then sometimes God takes us to what we call contemplation, which in the mystical tradition means contemplation is that spot where I am purely with the presence of God. It's the opposite of what we might mean in our standard English. We say, I contemplate something. Does that mean I'm going to think about it? That's not actually what we mean in the contemplative tradition. It's not I think about it. Infused contemplation means God just takes you. And you and God have moments of experiencing the deep intimacy. Have you had these moments ever in your life? When you feel like it could be a moment in silent prayer. It could be a moment of great joy, seeing a friend. It could be a moment of just great, your heart is so deeply touched by all of a sudden, it's like, oh my goodness, God made all this for me. Oh my goodness, there's my grandchild. Oh my goodness, there's the sunrise. In a certain sense, you might say that's something in the direction of what we mean by contemplation, but this is the pure form that we're opening ourselves to. And meditation is in the Catholic tradition, is our stepping stone to that, if God chooses to take us there. That's a very long answer to your question. Does that speak to your point?
Oh, it helps a lot.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely about being taken. Like we can't make that happen, but we can allow it. So like as Lee was saying, and it's not so much that the problem is with the thoughts, the problem is us thinking about the thoughts. Thoughts come and go, the mind thinks, that's what it does, like the heart beats, right? But it's when we grab onto it and we're, instead of being available to God's presence within, we are worrying about what we're going to do tomorrow, or how we're going to have this interview tomorrow, or what, like this worry place and the kind of gripping that's going on makes it difficult for God to get in there. Yeah, we're just not available. So this is really a practice to become more available. That is maybe the easiest way to say it. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other quick comments or thoughts before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
I went to the Adoration Chapel for one time, and it was great. I mean, I think there twice. One time I had totally not good brain. I was, doing all the things, not supposed to do the busy, not a busy mind. But the first time I didn't, and it was great. And both times it was great to be there. You got the candles, you got the Eucharist. So if you have an opportunity to go in the Adoration Chapel and do it, it's worth it. It's obviously a beautiful place, but it's just a peace-filled place too. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. We want to give ourselves every opportunity to receive God's grace, and that's a beautiful place to do it. And just as you were sharing that, I just thought, and this is not from the centering prayer tradition, it's just my own reflection on it. Sometimes in our prayer, we are identifying with the crucified Jesus. Sometimes in our prayer, we're identifying with the resurrected Jesus, perhaps. And on those days when my mind is quite busy and I simply say the word over and over and over, it's a kind of suffering, right? It's a kind of saying, I give you, God, this time. And maybe it's more closely aligned to the suffering of Jesus.
Excuse me, which word? When you say
The sacred, that sacred word, which
brings you back.
which brings me back to my intention. Yeah.
I don't understand. This is the second between Jesus, the life, the resurrected.
Yeah.
The crucified. What do you mean?
What I mean is that when we sit for 20 minutes and it's a day when it's really hard,
Okay.
like today is the day I do not want to sit.
Okay.
I do not want to pray. Have we had those days? Right. I mean, I assume we're all internally raising our hand, right? We don't all wake up every morning and go, I can't wait to pray today, right? Right. So it's like, today I don't want to do it. I've got 1,000 things on my mind, or I'm quite sad.
Okay.
And if I sit and give God this time, and that means during that period, 1,000 times I say that word because I'm worried, and my word is love. Love, God, I give you, I'm coming back to you. Oh my, I can't. What's my son doing? Love. How 1,000 times.
So I missed the first session.
Yeah.
So maybe I need a little homework here, but we'll back up. So the intent for all of us is not to, at those times, not to pray. Literally. I mean, I have my son, to your point, my son's, fell off a bike. My mother's in the hospital. I'm not sure about my job. I'm making this stuff up. But
Right.
Oh,
I didn't go to church on Sunday. All these
Yeah.
things that are at me.
Right.
Whether they're killed, whether I'm
I
scared.
just want to make sure they can hear you. Oh, yeah.
Oh, maybe not.
Yeah.
So, okay. But instead of, my son, okay, personally, my daughter is going in for surgery on Friday. She may have cancer, doubtful. It could very well be a benign tumor, but there's that fear. So I don't pray for her at that time, correct? I don't
right.
ask God thank you, God, for my other 3 children. Thank you for the grace that you've given me. I don't ask God anything. I don't pray for the surgeons. I don't do that at this time.
That's right.
All I do now is I go into prayer. The surgeon, okay, I've run her bio. I know she's good. Okay, well, but I don't know if UCS is good enough. You just panicked.
Right.
And what you're saying is, what I tried this week was look at the bottom of sailboats, because your analogy last week, Jim told me about the sailboat analogy, which was beautiful because I saw all these sailboats, which was the stress. And then I brought back to sacred word. But I don't pray. I just silence. Is that right? Anybody else?
Well,
confused a little bit like me?
so that is your prayer.
Just silence.
See, this is contemplative prayer. It's not intercessory prayer. It doesn't replace your intercessory prayer. So, and do watch the first week, because it'll probably make more sense. So watch the first, any of you who are, if any of this is confusing, watch the first week, watch the second week. But this does not replace intercessory prayer. It does not replace Mass. doesn't replace it, but this is the time where we simply sit in God's grace. And in a certain sense, I don't want to say it's the deepest prayer, but it's the prayer of simply surrendering and being with God. And it's funny because when you say, all I do is sit in silence, it's funny, I get the impulse to say, all I do, but think about reframing that to, I'm going to place myself in God's presence. Come, as your friend says, come hell or high water. As a great monk friend of ours says, I'm sitting here for these 20 minutes and I give God this time. You can spend another time in intercessory prayer or going to mass, whatever, but this time is instead of the worry, because most of what we're doing most of that time is actually not intercessory prayer, it's worry. Right?
Exactly.
So we're choosing something other than worry. We're choosing something other than doing. We're simply choosing God, God's self during this time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So it's almost like what Father Roger once said, I think 2 years ago. And you said,
You
I
remember.
surrender myself to you. Please take care of that. And that's the end of it. Just keep it
Yeah.
thinking.
Yes. So this is a great little transition for us for just a moment. We're in a few minutes, we're going to move into our prayer tonight because we don't want to keep you much past an hour. But we're going to talk just for a moment about what's happening here. So this is something that Father Keating, Abbot Keating, calls the human condition. And here's the human condition in a nutshell. We're made in God's image, right? Where there's a goodness to us, an essential goodness to us. And we're wounded. We're essentially good and we're wounded. And because of concupiscence,
What?
I know, except for you.
Big word alert. What was that?
Concupiscence. So what's the effect of woundedness on us? Our darkened intellect, our lack of faith. It's hard. Why is this hard for us to give over to God? Why is the whole parish not here? Why is the whole archdiocese not here for this? Right? If this is so profoundly beautiful, which I firmly believe it is, why is it so hard to get people to come? Because our human condition is painful. I think you said on the first night, I think you said, what happens when we sit in silence? Why is it so hard for us to sit in silence? It's our human condition. Meaning we are good, we are made in God's image, and we are broken, we're wounded. So what happens in our woundedness is that we don't trust, we don't surrender. We don't give over. We think we have to take. This is what our mind does. God's not going to give, so I have to take. I have to make it happen. Remember, this is the action of us in our woundedness. And you might say one way to think about this, because of our woundedness, this is just a way to help you think about your own human condition, is we, in a certain sense, split into three selves. We have the truest healthy self. That's who we truly are, made in God's image. That's kind of, we might call the healthy self. The self that can surrender, that part of us that knows God's grace, that part of it, little kids still have this. It's not fully, but babies have this. They kind of come into the world with this. Like, hey, they come in, hey, ready to receive grace, ready for God, right? Hey. And their parents are wounded. We're wounded, we're broken. We hurt our children. The best parents in the world hurt their children. Don't try to. This is concupiscence. It's original sin. This is what happens to us. And when we're hurt, there's two other little parts of us that split off. A wounded part of us that feels very injured. And here's the part that you want to think about a little bit, is we sometimes call the survivor self part, or the defended self. And this is the part of me, and this is the theological bit here. This is the part of me that actually doesn't believe I am forever always in God's grace. As Father Keating says, if I weren't in God's grace, I would simply disappear. I'm sustained in this moment solely by the action of God's love. That's all that keeps me alive. I am held in existence perpetually by God's grace. And the world is created for each of us. This is also a very Catholic teaching. Think about that one. Peter Crave says it this way. What if all of creation, what if God would have done it all for you? The whole thing. All of creation, the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And this is Catholic theology, all for you, Jim. If no one else was ever on planet Earth, God would have done it all. All the trees, all the flowing water, all the birds, all the beauty, all the food, all the love, the coming of Jesus, the whole passion just for you. That is a Catholic theological teaching. The part of us that can kind of open to that is the healthy self, the part that goes, I kind of get that. Okay, I can kind of get that. But the part of us that struggles with that is that protected, defended survivor self, because that's not true. I know it, I get it here, but I don't live my life that way. I get it. Okay, I get it. I've been to Catholic school from kindergarten straight on up. I get it. I've heard the nuns say that. I get it. Hear Father say it at Mass. I get it. But I don't get it. I don't get it. You with me? I get it. Okay, I get it. Yeah, we could pass that test. I don't get it. If I'm so loved, why is there so much pain? Why can't I get things right? Why is my life not looking the way I want? God, do you really have me? Do you really have my back? That's the stuff we're dealing with. That's the stuff that comes up when we sit in silence. Just consider this possibility. That's the stuff that comes up when we sit in silence. That's why it's so hard to sit in silence, because we don't really get it. And God's not going to let us go. God says, you're going to get it. So that's a little bit of the human condition that I want you all to know is common to all of us. And that's what we're up against when we sit in silence in prayer. Do you want to add anything to that?
What leaders call the survivor self or the defended self. Another word for that is ego. Yeah, ego. Yeah, it's like I am God, basically. In our egoic self, we don't believe in God, we don't feel God, we feel like we are basically here all by ourselves against a hostile world, right? Like a world that is scary, right? And I've got to be really good. I've got to make lots of money. I've got to get lots of power. I've got to be the best at something. Then we come up with like lots of strategies to be significant or to be great at something, so, and it's, we can all sense as part of us as always striving, always struggling, always trying, always competing, always, judging ourselves or others, right? It's like, it's not so pretty, that ego self, right? Like, but it's built on top of a brokenness or woundedness. We want to feel significant because deep down we don't feel significant. We don't feel loved, we don't feel worthy, whatever it is that comes through this woundedness. So this is kind of deep stuff, right? That is like, if we all just were open to God's grace all the time, well, we'd all be in union right now. Right? But there's obviously something that's keeping us from that, right? And the journey to God, or the journey of contemplation, is in a certain sense of welcoming that and letting God help us with this whole process of opening to grace, right? And returning to our, what Lee called healthy self or true self. It's also sometimes called true self. There's different words for that, but that part of us that can trust, that is made in the image and likeness of God. So that struggle inside of us, right, which we also see everywhere outside of us, is something that we might need to face at some point when we're sitting there silently.
So as we move into our prayer in a few minutes, in our centering prayer this evening, I invite you to consider that your action of moving into this prayer is not a passive kind of nice thing to do. It's a profoundly courageous action in response to God's grace. I think that's, if I could give you one thing from this centering prayer, I think sometimes from this whole course, sometimes I think we look at this contemplative prayer and go, oh, that's a nice thing to do, that some people in some of our Christian brothers or the saints were called to do. And that's a nice kind of icing on the cake. And I would propose from my experience and all I've read in this and experienced is that, well, this is an act of courage. Because you're going to sit right with your own humanity and give yourself to God right through it. I love that, we don't go around the cross, we go through it, right? So we say that to just appreciate and applaud your courage, and to also let you know if this is challenging or what you face as this comes up, you're on a heroic Christian journey to sainthood. I really believe that this is a heroic action of saints in the making. And it's not easy, but God's grace is abounding for us in this. So just know as we'll move into our centering prayer this evening, and just invite you maybe to take that with you as we move into it tonight. This is the gift of yourself to God for these next 15 or so minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's find our good, healthy posture. And this is where the body can really help us, like if we want to just have the body posture of availability and true self, like sitting up straight and relaxed and open. Just for a moment, just sensing that ease of being breathed. There's really nothing we need to do, it just happens all by itself. And just remembering the intention of this time is just to give yourself to God with your whole humanity. So noticing whatever thoughts might be present in your mind right now. There might be thoughts of achievement, or maybe even trying to do this meditation right. Thoughts of perfection, or just the ordinary ramblings of the mind. And with a sense of trusting in God's presence, and with a sense of open-heartedness, just create a space around these thoughts and around your human experience. All of it is held by God's grace. God is present here with you no matter what the content of your mind is like. Everything in our humanity belongs. God is here. Just allowing openness to unfold the present moment. This attitude of openness allows God to come forth and be present to you in all things. And whenever you find yourself thinking about any thoughts, just use your sacred word, this one or two syllable word that symbolizes your consent to God. Just ever so gently using it to let go of thinking about a thought and consenting to that unseen presence of God within. Just lightly saying your word and letting it help you to let go of your attachment to whatever thought might bubble up. This is your way of saying yes, your consent. All you need to do is to be present. Every thought is an invitation to openness. Just letting your word be a way of gently opening to God. Simply resting in this moment right here where God is. So let's continue for these next minutes in silence, practicing with great openness of heart. Amen. So be it. Let it be. Let your sacred word go now and just rest your mind and heart. Allowing yourself to recognize the gift that this present moment is. And I invite you to allow an image or a scene to come to you of something in your life, something that you're striving for, something at work or in a relationship, or a particular goal you're striving to achieve in your life. And as this comes to your mind's eye, I invite you to return to God's indwelling presence. Recognizing the striving is there, that you do have goals. And there's a goodness about that, there's a truth to that. And the bigger truth is that God is here with you. Just turn back towards the immediate presence of God and allow this goal to be unfolded in God's presence. Put this goal in God's hands. And letting it be held in God's grace. And then just letting go of thinking about this goal and recognizing the greatest gift, the greatest goal, so to speak, is God here now, always.
Just as we conclude, one more moment, trusting we are always held in God's presence on this Feast of All Souls, offering the time we've spent in prayer here for all those souls that we've held today in our hearts, souls lost to us but known to God, anyone that's been in our awareness, someone who's left us, just offering this time through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, asking her to take the gift of this time as an offering for those souls who are dear to us. Just trusting how beautiful and happy God is. We choose to turn towards Him with this devotion and offering of ourselves. Happy to receive us in our intention. Amen. So gently open your eyes. So we invite you this week again to dedicate some time each day to your centering prayer practice. Preferably in the morning, but whenever works for you. And as we say each week, 5 minutes once a day is better than saving it all up for Saturday. So carve out, even if it's just a few minutes of centering prayer, or up to 20. The goal is 20 minutes of silence. And just to put it in perspective, when you choose to go to a centering prayer retreat, which we hope you all will, you'll spend 3 30-minute time periods 3 times a day. So it'll be 90 minutes of silence, then lunch and another 90 minutes of silence, and then dinner and another 90 minutes of silence. So just to put it into context, so 20 minutes is generally the kind of prescribed, we can carve that out. But if you do 5, do 5. Do 5.
You've already done 5, do 6 or 7 or 8, just stretch it a bit. Yeah.
As we conclude, are there any questions or reflections? And there don't need to be, but are there any questions or reflections just on tonight? Okay, right. So we'll leave it there. Thank you, as always, for joining us, making the time. And we'll be back next week for our 4th and final centering prayer night together. So hope you can make it and join us for that. And we'll be praying with you this week. So know that we're praying along with you daily. All right. Good night. Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Thank you.